All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you guys all for attending this portion of the Wroclaw Global Forum, the Digital Summit portion. My name is Tyson Barker, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Brandenburg Institute for Security and Society. I also had the pleasure of being the rapporteur for the Atlantic Council's Task Force on the Transatlantic Digital Economy. So hopefully you'll all get the report that came out. The task force was chaired by Bill Kennard and Carl Bild, and there should be reports available. Today we're going to have a conversation about building a transatlantic marketplace, from TTIP to the digital economy. And we have a number of illustrious speakers with us today, but before I introduce them, maybe I can set the scene a little bit. So we're dealing with two issues, trade and technology, that are very emotionally laden. They are causing a great deal of social and political anxiety in both of our societies, on both sides of the Atlantic. But two areas where both the US and the EU see important need for policies, big projects, to drive forward our growth, our competitiveness, and job creation. Here in Europe, as you guys are all aware, the European Commission launched the Digital Single Market Project, a very ambitious project last year, looking at 16 areas to try to create the kind of single market online that it has successfully, for the most part, created offline. They have also passed the General Data Protection Regulation, which I think all of you guys are aware of, the most amended piece of legislation ever to be passed, I believe, in the European Union. In the transatlantic digital space, we also have a lot of policy churn happening right now. The Schrems decision, which struck down Safe Harbor, was followed very quickly on succession with negotiations for the US-EU Privacy Shield, which was agreed to in February. Very innovative document with a lot of new recourse mechanisms for European citizens to track personal data and how it is used in the United States. And just yesterday, Attorney General Lynch and Commissioner Jourova met in Amsterdam to sign the US-EU Umbrella Agreement, which is a new data sharing agreement that will allow both sides to exchange data on law enforcement and terrorism matters. Then beyond that, it's almost like we have concentric circles. So we have the big projects here in Europe. We've got the big transatlantic data projects. Beyond that, we have, of course, the TTIP, which is dealing with some areas of the online economy, e-commerce, ITC, but also so much more, SMEs, anti-corruption, energy, agriculture, so many more areas. So we have these big, ambitious projects happening, but it's all happening against the backdrop of a society that seems to be very in the mood of an anti-establishment mood, an anti-European mood, a mood that is very fearful and wary of trade, fearful and wary of the role that technology has in changing the job market. So it's a very challenging time to take on big new projects. And that's, I think, what we'll probably discuss mainly today. So we have four excellent speakers to deal with these projects. The first is Tony Gardner, who is the US ambassador to the EU and has been there. He's been kind of present at the creation of most of these projects, arrived, I believe, at the beginning of 2014. To his left, we have Minister Katarzyna Kacperek. Sorry. I'm getting used to, my Polish is not as good as it should be. She's the Undersecretary of State for Economic Diplomacy, the Americas, Asia, and Europe at the Foreign Ministry. To her left, we have Anna Jakubowski, who is the Director General for Poland and the Baltics of Coca-Cola. And to her left, to my far left, we have Kaja Kallas, who is a member of the European Parliament and dealing with these issues. So I'd actually like to start with MEP Kallas and ask about the digital single market. So we're 1 year on. You're the big watcher of the digital single market in the European Parliament. How would you rate the progress that has been made? Is it a boom, a bust, or both?
Oh, well, it's sort of both, but I'm still positive about this because we have different legislative proposals on the table that we are discussing. I think what is important is that we understand that we are not creating the laws but the environment, which is a bit different. So it's a very big transformation, very big set of reforms that we have to do in discussing all these digital matters. And we have currently quite a few proposals on the table from the Commission side. But of course, to my taste, everything is moving too slow. So it could be much faster, but this is not only criticism on the regarding the Commission, but also the Parliament, because although the European Parliament is saying that European Commission should move faster, should come with the proposals, then when we start to decide or debate, then these take ages. First, discussing who really has the competence of rendering the rules, and then all the timelines are too slow. Of course, democracy takes time, and all these things that are so fundamental need to be discussed through. But at the same time, creating this environment for something that then moves on and moves on in the direction that all the member states start to create their own rules for sharing economy, for robotics, artificial intelligence, and then we again have the problem that we have 28 sets of different rules.
And maybe if I can ask one follow-up question, this might be something you saw with GDPR, right? Because GDPR took about, 5 years to get through the process. It's now done. It's going to start to be implemented. It's a uniform regulation. But do you feel that it is future-proof? Do you think it's ready to handle the Internet of Things, big data? How do you define personally identifiable data, that kind of thing?
Well, let's see. I wasn't in the European Parliament at that time when it started, so maybe I would have approached it in a bit different way. But still, it is in place. So now it's the question of implementation, and we definitely have to watch that we don't have again 28 different ways of implementing the one set of rules that we have. And I see this risk because if you hear what different data protection authorities are saying, how they will implement the rules, approaches are totally different, and this is very worrying.
Madam Minister, you're following this as well, but you're also following TTIP, and you're probably dealing with something very similar, which is 28 member states with 28 different perceptions of what TTIP should be. What is the Polish perception? What are the priorities that Poland has? What would Poland like to see in a TTIP?
Let me start with an obvious sentence. TTIP is an extremely difficult agreement. We have a lot of experience in negotiating and closing free trade agreements with Korea, with some other partners, and probably because of the nature of the agreement and also especially its comprehensive, very comprehensive nature, it's not an easy one to negotiate. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, there are a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of concerns, a lot of doubts about the agreement. But I think what we are very often missing is to frame the TTIP in a very specific context. First, in the geopolitical context and in the context of transatlantic relations. And also the second framework we should also see this TTIP is the bigger picture of international trade. So on these geopolitical issues, that's probably one of the priority of European countries, not only of Poland government, but also of other EU member states, to have an excellent relationship, transatlantic relationship with US, and TTIP definitely will contribute to this. And on the trade issue, if you look where we are at the moment with WTO, completely stuck with negotiations, and also at the same time countries and regions looking for bilateral trade agreements, then you can see that if you stay with outside the WTO framework, then probably you need some agreement also which will regulate or which will move forward the trade between European Union and United States. And I mean, if you look at if you ask about the Polish position on TTIP, definitely we, in general, we support the agreement, thinking both in this geopolitical perspective, but also we think it will have a positive impact on trade. But of course, the devil sticks in details, and there are also a lot of concerns and a lot of voices raised by companies, not only in Poland but also in other countries, which we definitely need also to take into account.
Mr. Ambassador, the Commission President just announced this week that he's going to seek the 28 members of the Council to renew their vows on TTIP, to recommit to the negotiation mandate. How does the United States see this decision, and what do you think can be done to start to sell TTIP a little bit more outside of Brussels, perhaps? Because just to take an example from Germany, support for TTIP has fallen from 55% in 2014 to 17% today.
Well, thanks for the question. We are in a difficult spot on TTIP. There's no doubt about it. I think the President's decision to ask for renewal of vows is a good thing, is a timely thing, because it's not enough for the member states to give a mandate to the Commission to negotiate on behalf of all the 28. It's important for the member states to actually sell it at home, which is something we feel they haven't done, although we fully appreciate Poland's very strong support for this agreement. Poland's voice is appreciated and it's heard in Brussels and beyond. And I wanted to focus on the P in TTIP, and I think, Minister, you were just talking about the P, not just the second T, which is trade, and not just the I, which is the investment part. It's the partnership part. Because look, even if we're right about the great economic consequences of this agreement, and all the studies I've seen, all of the serious studies I've seen have shown that the economic consequences of this deal for both sides of the Atlantic would be significant. We don't know how big, because we don't have a deal yet, but we think it will be significant. But even if it's, let's say, 100 billion or more, it's relatively modest compared to the digital single market and the consequences of getting that right, or completing the single market and services, or the economic consequences of having an industrial internet fully launched in both Europe and the United States. So the P is important. It's not just an economic deal. Of course, it won't pass if it's not economically good for both sides. But the partnership part is arguably the winning argument. I can tell you, Tyson, I've been in 18 of the 28 member states of the EU. The jobs and growth argument is an argument that doesn't work, even in countries of Europe that are starved of jobs and growth. There's only one argument that works, and the argument is that we have an opportunity over the next 5 to 10 years together, the United States and the EU, to shape the rules of global trade together. And if it's not us, I say this even to the skeptics who don't particularly like the United States, it'll be other countries, and we know who they are. And those standards will be set at a lower level.
Well, the P, the partnership, of course, applies to the U.S. and Europe, and it also obviously has a geopolitical dimension. It also, of course, applies to the other P in this equation, which is the private sector. Maybe, Anna, you can provide some perspective about how the private sector is reacting to TTIP, and maybe also to Ambassador Gardner's point about, other countries like China, like Russia, setting global standards. How important is this for the private sector?
Well, I think, and in particular, also having the honor of being part of the AmCham board here in Poland, and we sit with 300 member companies on the AmCham board. 80 of those are Fortune 500 companies. So there's a constant dialogue around how important is this and what are the mechanisms that need to be in place. I think everybody understands that there is a potential for significant growth, but obviously the devil is in the details. But ultimately, it is about it is about, from a private sector standpoint, it's about increasing competitiveness. It's about advancing innovation as a way to ultimately lower costs, increase productivity, and therefore be able to invest back and ultimately fuel growth. And the opportunities are perhaps maybe even somewhat, the larger companies will find ways to do that because of their global scale. The real opportunity then becomes for the smaller, mid-sized organizations who will struggle with not having the scale of global mass that the bigger international companies will have. And I think that we have to look at it in several ways. One, which is how do we create the environment that you talked about, which allows for all competitiveness and therefore investment to be fueled. The second thing is the partnership within the private sector as well. If I look at a large company like ourselves, a lot of innovation that we're going to be dealing with isn't necessarily always going to come from other larger companies. We're going to be reaching out to smaller, mid-sized companies that are far more faster in decision making, perhaps leaner in structure, able to move quicker in terms of being able to supply larger companies in terms of innovative ideas. So there's a lot at stake in terms of creating the environment. There's a lot at stake in terms of having sort of some sectors that will have perhaps a first mover advantage because it will be easier for them to operate. Private sector, I think, by and large, is where the medium and smaller size companies have perhaps the most to gain, but they're probably the most worried because they are the ones that perhaps don't see necessarily the opportunity side as quickly as they see the risk side.
Right. I think that's a really important point. And one of the things about TTIP, which is often underplayed but is starting to get more traction, is that it is, I believe, the first trade agreement to address SMEs in a separate chapter. And I think that that's a point that really needs to be made, again, to average Europeans and entrepreneurs. A question for MEP Kallas, and then we'll start to open it up. So start to think about your questions as well. And when I do call on you, please identify yourself and identify who you'd like your question to be asked to. When we're talking about standards being set in other places, one issue that I think of, and of course you would as well as dealing with digital issues, is forced localization. The idea of digital sovereignty. How much do you see this as something that is influencing the debate around the digital single market, and what is your position on this issue?
That's a very good question because we see that a lot. When we talk about digitalization or digitalization of industry, then what everybody agrees is that it's global in nature. When startups start with their businesses, they first think globally and then start to think locally. So it's different than doing business years ago, and therefore we definitely have to talk about being the standard makers rather than the standard takers, which is the point that Mr. Ambassador also made, that who is then setting the standards. But when we talk about the data and the global nature of data usage, then really what is worrying is that different member states, different members of the European Parliament also point out the data localization requirements. So that in order to do business in Europe, you have to keep the data in Europe. And it's not necessarily more secure in that way, because we have seen studies as well that if it is localized, everybody knows that all the data of Germans are kept in those servers which are located there. So it's kind of easy for cyber attacks as well, but I think that this goes against the nature of the free flow of data when you have data localization, and that's what we have to fight against, definitely. But what you also pointed out, all these anti-global voices that we have, more loud voices, these work all against this ideas that we should have free flow of data and mutual partnership.
I don't see any questions, so I will. Would you like to? Sure.
All right, so you've now tied together the two themes of trade and the digital economy, which I think was really important. So it's not just what we're doing in TTIP, TPP, TISA, which is the Transatlantic Investment Services Agreement, the Trade and Services Agreement, sorry. This is absolutely crucial, and it's raised in the excellent report the Atlantic Council has done. I've read it. I think it's a terrific job. You've done a terrific job. Recommend everyone to read it. And its objective is really setting forth 20 very specific steps and 5 building blocks between now and 2020 to build a vision I think we all embrace, a transatlantic digital marketplace stretching from Silicon Valley to Tallinn. So it's great that Kai is here. And one of the core building blocks is enhancing digital trade. And this is, for those of you who will read it or have read it, this is step 2. And I read with interest, and I really endorse what the report says here. The United States and the EU should use TTIP negotiations to create an open, interoperable digital marketplace limiting data localization and other measures that bring protectionism into digital trade. In particular, the United States and the EU should use trade talks to bring the best elements from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership e-commerce chapter, into TTIP, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. For those of you who are interested in what U.S. policy is with regard to digital policy in trade, I would point you to a speech that Robert Holliman, Deputy USTR, gave a while ago called the Digital Dozen, the 12 policies that we pursue in our trade agreements. I won't mention all of them. I'll just go through a few of them. First, the internet should remain free and open. Second, complete prohibition on customs duties for digital products. Third, refrain from putting any digital products of another party at a competitive disadvantage in their markets. Confronting, fourth, the discriminatory and protectionist barriers to cross-border data flows. Fifth, preventing forcing companies to localize their computing services. Sixth, prohibiting our trading partners from requiring companies to transfer their technology, production processes, or other proprietary information to persons in their respective territories. And seventh, and I'll stop here, is having binding commitments ensuring technology choice that prohibit our partners from requiring companies to purchase and utilize local technology. There are 5 others, but those 7 are critical, and that's what we're pursuing in all our trade agreements. And it also reflects, and here I'll stop, our Trade Promotion Authority, which is our mandate that we got from Congress, that is both applicable to TPP and to TTIP. So we are under mandate by Congress to achieve these goals.
And just to build on that, and then to the minister, we have from 2011 these US-EU ICT principles, which were agreed to by the European Union and us, and I believe it's kind of a song sheet that both sides sing from to third countries, be it in India, East Asia, and I believe it includes this issue, this exact issue that you mentioned. So we're building on these principles into hard values and eventually into trade agreements. Madam Minister.
I just want to raise one point which have been briefly mentioned before. It relates actually both to TTIP and to digital partnership and all other agreements we are negotiating, even CETA, the agreement with Canada. It's a lack of communication. I think we failed somehow to explain what's behind it. And of course, one part is having tough negotiations on very important interests and to reach agreement. And I understand also the position of Commission that we cannot disclose everything in the negotiations. But communication somehow have been conducted very, very poorly. I have participated with Michał Kobosko in Katowice, right, in a panel discussion on TTIP. And you know that the biggest concern right now in Germany and some other countries is this ISDS clause. Most of the people, if you ask to explain what's going on in this ISDS issue, they don't know the answer. So people cannot accept something they don't know about. And I know that Commission has changed a little bit strategy right now, and Ambassador probably can tell us more about it. But I think it's a while too late, and we have to find a way to communicate people what's the TTIP, what's the digital partnership, what's all those agreements the Commission is negotiating about.
That's a great point. I mean, if you go to the United States and ask the average American, are you pro TTIP or anti TTIP, the answer you'll probably get is, what is TTIP? I mean, nobody's heard of it in the United States. There's just starting to be a debate around TPP, but it's just not part of our political discourse. Madam Minister, can you tell us, here in Poland, to what extent TTIP is part of the domestic debate?
I think not to a big extent. Of course, there are some non-governmental organizations who are raising, to some point, justified concern about the process of negotiations or of detailed elements. I think it's great credits goes also to AmCham for raising this debate, for raising the discussions and trying to inform people and public opinion on what's the TTIP about, and also our Ministry of Economic Development is doing a great job about it. My ministry is also supporting them in that campaign. We don't see really a huge opposition, but it doesn't mean people know in Poland what's TTIP about. And if we don't communicate what it's about, then either they will go on internet and read stuff, or those who are against this agreement, they explain them what is it about. And my experience from Berlin, I followed very closely the demonstration against TTIP in Berlin, and the arguments they have been presented to the people there, especially about this ISDS, because I think this has been the most contentious issue. They explain about the mechanism and presented the dangers which are behind, about the mechanism which hasn't been, which has been already changed by the Commission. So the proposal discussed with US side was completely different on what the people have been, influenced with. And I think this is the problem, how to communicate. And I think eventually Poland may also face the problem. And moreover, people also deserve to know. They can know what are the pros, what are the cons, and then they can decide.
Anna, maybe to ask you a little bit about the role of the private sector in aiding in that communication. Obviously, Ambassador Gardner said that the economic argument helps, but isn't the whole piece, because anybody can play with the numbers. You don't know for sure that this many jobs will be created by a new trade agreement. But the geopolitical argument helps maybe even more. How can the private sector support that message, to get that message to its employers, its customers, the businesses that you're working with here in Poland? Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the core leadership values, if you will, that corporations increasingly are looking to is advocacy, ambassadorship, and building stronger networks and stronger ties. No one company will put itself out on one topic, and that's where industry associations, that's where organizations like AmCham play a critical role, to be able to take cross-sector, to be able to take cross issues that are, why would Coca-Cola get into the same room as Toyota, as some other manufacturers, IBM, if you take a look at the industries, there's not a lot of places for us to get into one room and have conversations, let alone with SMEs and what have you. So companies as a whole are recognizing that relationships, networks, being locally integrated are critical. The ways to be able to do that are largely through strong industry associations, that partnership that you talked about, the private-public partnership that allows the dialogue to happen so that communication can move forward. There is no real vehicle today for that to happen unless we really push a lot more of this through organizations like AmCham, through industry associations, and through even an event like the Wroclaw Global Forum, where again you're bringing together a diverse group of thought leaders to really challenge how is this communication going to happen? How is the environment going to be created? Of course there's challenges, but without risk, without leaning forward, we're not going to be able to get through these challenges.
And this idea of kind of multi-stakeholder ownership of anything is also very influential in the digital space when we're talking about creating digital rules of the road.
Well, and one of the things we have to remember is that ultimately consumers, we ourselves, are already very global. I mean, each of us is already communicating and operating in a globally digital world, whether it's through social networks, whether it's through various aspects of how we conduct our lives. So from the consumer standpoint, the world is moving on. And it's moving on right now in a way where there's few platforms for there to be, when we talk about the environment, for a framework so that this doesn't become complex, costly, and ultimately it will start to close down the ability to scale and for companies to be able to export more, for companies to be able to access markets, because it'll simply become too difficult. And therefore the big will win, right? And the big will continue to win simply because they have the global scale and they have the cost structure to do it. So how we ensure that the framework is in place to encourage the digital world to at least be a platform whereby you're not hindered, and it's certainly not necessarily locking us into a playground that we have no flexibility on, but at least gives us a few areas where everybody has a common language, a common policy, a common rule book, whereby then within that we can invest and we can accelerate how we partner then with, be it big, small, and be it public-private.
I think you bring up a couple of good points that I'd like to ask the ambassador about. One is actually in the context of the digital single market. One is the fact that we're all in this together, that consumers are global, and that's definitely the case online. I mean, to think of a European single market is almost impossible without the United States because the US plays such an important role. The other point you bring up is the idea that when we go into regulation, it can become complex and costly and start to close the door on new innovation, new companies, and favor incumbents that have, as you say, the resources available to them to make those adjustments to their regulations. So the question that I would have for the ambassador is, you've been watching this process since it was launched a year ago. Where do you think that the Commission should lead in the digital single market? Where do you think it should follow? And where do you think it should get out of the way?
Well, first of all, we're big fans of the DSM. It has huge impact, potential impact on U.S. technology firms, clearly, and we think overwhelmingly it's a positive thing. And it's absolutely right for it to be a focus, one of the top 5 priorities of this Commission, along with the Energy Single Market, Capital Markets Union, Banking Union, and so forth. Europe has to get it right. Europe cannot get this wrong. So globally, we are in favor. We just saw a package of proposals that were introduced on May 25th. And we had originally some questions, even some concerns about where the Commission was going on online platform regulation. Some ideas have been floated by the French and the Germans particularly and taken up by a few other member states. But we're heartened by the nature of the conclusions that were reached in the document, the Commission document, on online platforms. Our view has been and remains, and I think shared by the Commission now, that there is no proof, no evidence that there is a need for new regulation to cover online platforms. First of all, because they're so different. It's very hard to come up with a regulation that deals with all online platforms in the same way. One size does not fit all. And we know from our own experience in the United States that our existing regulations, whether it's consumer protection or antitrust protection, that are enforced by our antitrust authorities, the Department of Justice and the FTC, that our existing tools are sufficient to deal with problems or alleged problems of market abuse by online market players. So there's no evidence, we think, that we need new regulation in the United States, and I think that's where the Commission is also coming out. In terms of the geo-blocking, the unjustified geo-blocking proposals, here the government doesn't have a view simply because our businesses are on both sides of this equation. Some are concerned, those are the producers of content, and those others are the distributors who want to continue dealing with Europe as a number of separate member states where they should be able to deal with them on a territory-by-territory basis. But on the whole, I think some of the concerns that were even expressed by the content producers about geo-blocking have now been dealt with because the definition of what is unjustified geo-blocking has now been significantly reduced. I think there is some concern here, I'll stop, with the proposal of the reform of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. And I understand what they're trying to achieve in terms of the objective, because there's an unlevel playing field between television and now video on demand, because more and more people are consuming content by video on demand rather than watching TV. There are rules that are applying to television in terms of content and investing locally that don't apply to video on demand services like Netflix. And you can imagine that there's some, including Netflix, but not only, who are saying, well, we shouldn't be obliged to live by the same rules about 20% EU content for everything that we stream for video on demand in Europe. So there's some concerns that this is more and more protectionism, when frankly the world has moved on, and Europe should be moving away and not expanding the rules regarding EU-wide EU content that are mandated rather than having consumers choose. But on the whole, on an upbeat note, we are in favor. We think that globally, DSM is a good thing. Europe has to get it right.
I wanted to first comment on the communication with the voters. I think we have to be very clear as well that average voter really doesn't care about TTIP. So first it is how to make it attractive to an average voter to understand and or to take interest in the topic. And then I think what also Ambassador Gardner said in those listing those priorities regarding digital, that this shows that we are much more similar. I mean, Europe and United States are very close to each other in every way, in the principles of net neutrality, non-discrimination, all the things applying to the digital world, that we are the ones who actually are closer together. So we should stick closer as well. And the voters usually want to be with the winners. So it is like in the global scale. So if we do this, the voters also are on the winning side. But of course, there are much more arguments to be used as well. Talk about the incumbents and the regulation, what we need or don't need. I very much agree to this, that also in our Parliament's DSM report, we came to the conclusion that there is no new regulation needed regarding platforms, and it was about the biggest discussion was about the platform liability. So this is a very valid point. And when we have the discussions, it is very clear that very many members have actually one or two incumbent companies in mind while talking about platforms, and they usually start with G, A, or F. So if we start to make the rules keeping in mind those G, A, or F platforms, then we actually design the rules that are made for those incumbents and not suitable for everybody else and not suitable for the platforms that we have in Europe. Regarding unjustified geo-blocking, I think we also have to understand where the geo-blocking comes from. So I agree that if we approach this in a 20th century way, then we end up with the 20th century result and not the one that is suitable for the 21st century. And I think we have to address all the reasons why companies geo-block. If those reasons fall, then they have no reason to geo-block because of capitalism. They want to sell to as many companies or as many consumers as possible. So what are the reasons for geo-blocking? These are the reasons, if it is a tax or consumer protection issue, then we have to solve these issues. That if there are 28 sets of different rules for consumer protection, then when we have one rule, then there's no point in I'm not selling to you because you have different rules. So I think this is the fundamental issue to solve these issues that are behind geo-blocking.
Thank you so much. I want to turn a little bit to the issue of privacy. We talked a little bit about the Privacy Shield. Obviously, this was a breakthrough negotiation, but it has since come under fire by European regulators, also by the European Parliament. There was a recent vote citing perceived deficiencies. Poland, in particular, has a history with privacy very deep. And it has been expressed in the streets, also on trade agreements. One just has to think to 2012 and the debates around ACTA. I'd be interested to know, Madam Minister, what is the feeling here about the privacy protections in place by U.S. companies, storage of data in the U.S.? Is that a big debate? What is the civil society debate here? And are you satisfied with the US-EU Privacy Shield as it currently stands?
I would say even if if the questions of privacy is not an issue right now, ACTA shows that it can be very well an issue and very fast an issue. And definitely we are one of our priority within the EU agenda, and also other platforms of cooperation with countries of our region is definitely the digital market and protection of intellectual rights and privacy. And we put a lot of attention and a lot of focus on to ensure the highest standard in this regard. And definitely we also think that giving the potential in digital trade and e-commerce, also in the context of transatlantic cooperation, transatlantic partnership, we believe that TTIP can be and should be also a platform where we try to converge these standards and put it at the highest possible level. Once again, I would raise the issue of communication, because if you talk about the digital economy, internet, social media, then definitely this issue, privacy of data protection, data storage, also internet communication, will be the point number one also in the public opinion discourse.
Thank you. I know this is a conversation. Oh, we got a question. Please.
Right now?
Yes.
No, because you touched upon a very important points, and I thought we'll use the opportunity. There's a couple of elephants in the room that I think we need to address, and one definitely is surveillance, and that I think had direct effect on the on views on TTIP and on other, let's say, transatlantic initiatives like data privacy. But the other big elephant in the room is copyright reform, which I think we haven't addressed. And the fact that, and I think in the US there's a balance now found. It seems like the content providers and the distributors have found a way to work together. It seems in Europe we haven't had yet that chance. I think the Commission is not doing enough in that respect. We're not seeing enough initiatives on copyright reform, and the portability is, I think, very minimal. You've raised an important point on MPAA and major studios, US major studios, who have an interest in actually fragmenting the European market and thereby making it more difficult to create the DSM. So my question, I guess, is to all of you is, how do we address these issues? We can't keep hiding that they don't exist. We need to we need to start talking about it in a more constructive manner. And is there a space for the US to give us guidance, since it seems you've found a solution? Thank
All
you.
right, so we've got two questions there, one on surveillance and the other on copyright reform here in Europe. And obviously, the critique across the board of the Privacy Shield is that it does not lift the possibility for bulk data collection. Maybe the ambassador can speak to how surveillance has been addressed, what needs to be done, and then maybe also we can get a European Parliament perspective as well. And if you want to touch on the issue of copyright as well.
Well, just starting on the MPAA, it's not just a U.S. issue, by the way. There are a lot of content producers who have the same interests, exactly the same interests, which are, justifiable. They want to deal with the local specificities of each market where they want to invest and invest in local content, and they want to provide their distributors, I guess, with territorial protection. So we shouldn't just say it's not justified or it's just an American idea. I think it's widely shared. But I think they're feeling better with the way that the proposals are coming out. Now, in terms of surveillance, we've made a lot of progress here. So let's, it's not all gloom and doom. We're not out of the woods. And I'll be honest with you, one of my biggest frustrations is that we're still 2 years, 3 months into my mandate, we're still talking about data privacy. I thought when I'd started, by now, we would be talking about things that are more value added. Things like digital, we'd be focusing on the digital economy, we'd be focusing on the industrial internet, rather than being sucked back into this vortex of discussions regarding data privacy. But a few days ago, I think we got final language on, I don't know how many of you are following this, but the ombudsman role within the State Department to handle complaints about government access to data, which is a big deal. That was one of the last outstanding issues in Privacy Shield. I think we're there, knock on wood, I think we're there, so meaning that the Commission will soon issue its adequacy finding. It will be challenged. We're assuming it will be challenged. There's no doubt we were set back a long way by the Schrems case. I think it took a lot of us by surprise, including in Europe. But we feel it will withstand challenge at the European Court, because the test that was set forth in the European Court was, was not you had to be equivalent, right? It wasn't a test of exact similarity. The U.S. system, we believe, provides for equivalent protection as that provided in Europe. And we think that with the tools that we have in the Privacy Shield, we can prove it, both in terms of the principles that companies have made to make their commitments under Privacy Shield enforceable, the commitments from U.S. government agencies to ensure the effective administration and oversight and enforcement, and third, the explanations which are in these attached letters, including from our intelligence services, about the U.S. legal framework on the access for national security. All of that, I think, when examined by the court, will give, we think, a very high chance that it will be upheld on appeal. I would just say, we should not consider this as a Europe versus the United States issue. There are a number of cases before the court which are now challenging UK and Swedish legislation about government access to data. And I think there is a high likelihood that the court will be very critical about those two member states, and there may be other cases coming up. I would also mention that the Fundamental Rights Agency, which is, I think, an entity of the Council of Europe, came out with a very damning report. It looked at all 28 member states' rules regarding government access to citizens' data, and it found that many of the 28 had legislation that did not provide adequate protection. So you can understand there's a bit of frustration in the United States that we have been singled out because of Privacy Shield, when within Europe there are many, not a few, many member states that do not arguably meet the standards set forth in the European Convention on Human Rights. But we feel good about this deal, and we think that if we get the umbrella agreement ratified in the European Parliament, which I think would be a big deal. Judicial redress is part of it, giving EU citizens the same rights as US citizens under the Privacy Act. That'd be a big deal. Then we can move on to other matters.
I think regarding the privacy, we had a meeting with U.S. congressmen in November on transatlantic digital agenda. And then I think what came out of this discussion is the fundamental difference how we treat the privacy. So privacy in Europe is considered to be human right. So no way it can be compromised. But in US, the security is important. So there's the difference still to the approach on the political level on the discussions that we had. But at the same time, I also think that that this reaching this agreement is a good point and very valid point also that when we had the discussions of the new data protection regulation, then it turns out that very many members actually have to make huge changes to their the way they treat data because they don't really comply with all the rules. Regarding copyright, the approach of the Commission has been so far that you can't take the whole cake, so you just make changes bits by bits to get there. So the overall copyright reform, of course, from the members of European Parliament as well, the criticism was that you are not addressing the elephant in the room, that we should, when we talk about geo-blocking and we leave aside the copyright issues, but we should talk about the copyright. But what Vice President Ansip said was that you know, he understood that there is so much reluctance to do this from his fellow colleagues as well, that he can't go ahead with the huge reform, but he can do bits and pieces to get there. So there is already portability, there is this geo-blocking, so we get there in small steps.
Thank you. We have a question here, and then we'll maybe take final comments from the panelists.
Beata Słomińska from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have touched many issues on TTIP and a lot on communication, but I'm interested in one more issue about the possibility of its adoption of I'm not addressing this question to anyone specifically because I'm interested in your views of the panel. Because we are after almost 3 years, after 13 negotiation rounds, there is still a lot to do ahead of us, and many things will fall probably to the end game. And we are not living a world where the TTIP issue is the only issue. We have terrorism cooperation, cooperation on fighting the terrorism, which is another big issue, crisis of migration. So there are so many topics. And then we are coming back to TTIP, and we see the reality, which is the US election coming soon, and after in the next year's elections in Germany and France. So this is such a complex issue. How do you see when TTIP, before the Trans-Pacific Partnership or after, will it help us or not? So how do you view this complex issue? How could it be solved?
All right, the other elephant in the room, the political process, democracy. Maybe we can just go down the line and everybody can kind of address that and bring in any digital issues that you'd like. So maybe starting with the ambassador.
We're not where we should be. You know, after 13 rounds in 3 years, you mentioned, but we are going to fight for this. That's our clear mandate from the president to Mike Froman, who's our trade representative. We're going to fight for this until January 20, which is the expiration of the mandate of this administration. But we're not where we should be. I think we still have a chance if we're pragmatic on both sides. And what do I mean by pragmatic? By pragmatic, I mean, first of all, we have to not just say we want this deal. Our bureaucracy have to fight for it. And that's why it gets back to your original question, Tyson, that bureaucracies have to have a common face to the world, not have some ministers criticizing this deal every day, or pointing fingers in the press, saying that it's just the fault of one side. We need to be pragmatic on all the range of issues on the table, and there are many: government procurement, agriculture, also on investor-state dispute settlement resolution, on all of those issues. But finally, I will say, and this has been said by Cecilia Malmström and Mike Froman, the world doesn't end if we don't get there by January 20. I'm confident that if Hillary Clinton is the person who walks in on January 20, she will find a way to support this deal through a few tweaks. You know, she's had to be very careful about being too pro-trade and pro-TPP or pro-TTIP because of Bernie Sanders. I think she'll find a way to support this deal. I have no idea about what a Donald Trump as president would do, frankly. We're still optimistic that in the lame duck period before January 20, there is a good chance that we can get TPP passed. That's what I'm told by the people who are counting votes. I hope that's the case, because if it is passed, TTIP should be simpler to pass than TPP for all the obvious reasons. These are two regions of the world that share the same high standards and high values. It should be easier to do than with a region of the world that arguably has lower standards.
Madam Minister, care to comment on those elections?
No, don't ask me who will win. I think timeline is important, and we all see the determination on both sides to at least close the negotiations. But we also believe that while being determined, or while talking about the timeline and fast possible reaching of agreement, I think we should still keep in mind the scope of the agreement, and the very goal we would like both sides to achieve with this agreement. I don't think that because of the time pressure could be good to compromise on some issues in the way that it will make difficult to have a public acceptance for that agreement. Because if we do it, because of elections in Germany, in France, then there might be difficulties to ratify this agreement. And I think this probably would be the most challenging part.
I think from a private sector standpoint, one of the important roles is to play the role that was mentioned several times, including by the Minister, of extending the platform for communication here. And the role that industry associations, the role that the private sector can do is continue to reinforce that growth is critical to all economies. Poland is already at a state where we have positive trends, and it's how do we continue to accelerate growth in Poland. And it's going to be done through increasing cost efficiencies to allow better productivity, to be able to allow investment to ultimately both come into Poland as well as leverage Polish exports. And ultimately, private sector, the AmChams of the world, the industry associations need to be the supporting platform for that communication, for that to be able to continue to be a dialogue and really play the role between the private-public divide and offer that as an opportunity to ensure that the dialogue continues while the policy making is being addressed.
Thank you. I think I could quote the Jean-Claude Juncker here and say that we all know what we have to do, but first we have to win the elections. So I think it is very, very valid point that this adoption or the agreement going through is dependent on the elections and what is the overall picture, and that is in turn very much dependent on what the voters think. So what ways the voters go, and that is dependent on the communication. So how things are presented. So I think again we should focus on the similarities rather than the things that we have different. And on the positive side, the European Parliament adopted interim position on the TTIP, and it was positive. So majority, great majority of the European Parliament members supported TTIP, and as they are all elected directly from different member states, so it's a good point that shows the overall attitude as well.
Thank you so much. Just for some context, the average FTA takes 7 years from beginning to coming into force in the United States. And we have a long history and tradition from NAFTA to the bilateral with Korea, even TPP, of starting negotiations and doing the bulk of it in one administration, and then closing the deal, getting it passed through Congress in another administration. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I want to thank our panelists so much. Let's give them a round of applause.